Welcome back to Everything But the Lesson Plan, the podcast that gives educators the tools, resources, and real talk conversations to thrive inside and outside the classroom. I am Francesca Thompson, and today we're diving into a topic that is not just important, but it's necessary. How we as educators can better support young Black males in the classroom. We know the stats. Black boys are disproportionately disciplined, often misunderstood, and sometimes left without the mentorship and encouragement they need to thrive. But today, we're talking to Mikal Driver about solutions to empower, uplift, and truly see our students for who they are. Joining me in this conversation is who I said, Mikal Driver, social innovator and literacy lab program manager. He is here with some answers. He's a mentor and an advocate for young Black males, helping us to bridge those gaps in education and push for more equitable learning experiences. We're going to talk about the challenges, the solutions, and the real impact, the intentional support that we need to have for our students. So, whether you're a teacher, administrator, or someone who just cares about the success of students, this conversation you don't want to miss. Let's get into it. Good afternoon, Mikal. How are you?
Francesca, I'm doing really, really good. I'm glad to be here and honored to have the opportunity to talk about something such as an important topic as Black males in the classroom and how we expand their opportunities to learn and grow.
You know what? And so Mikal, I worked with Mikal before on a separate project, and I've seen him interact with students before and some of our Black male students. And sir, you do a great job. Okay. So I was like,
Thank
I
you so much.
gotta get him on the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It really means a lot.
Yes.
It's
So I
it's really interesting when you think about those experiences of how you
Mhm.
show up for others, but you don't always see it for yourself. And that's something we're gonna talk about when it comes to like our young men in the classroom. It's a
Yes,
complex that we all have and we grow into.
that part right there. Okay. Yes. So it's just, tell me a little bit about who you are and what you're doing right now.
So my name is Mikal Driver. I'm born and raised from the west side of Atlanta, Georgia, and I am a career educator. Sometimes say social innovator,
Mhm.
social entrepreneur, but it's all based in education practices on how to not take what we've been given thus far and say it always has to be reinvented or changed,
Yeah.
but challenged and questioned because you have to like when you think about history and the value of history, it's about how it all interconnects to how we get to our now
Yeah.
and the past education systems and the way education was seen and developed was based in some practices that were not always common for the success of just any person. So
Hmm.
when you think about that, I really try my best to grow into becoming someone who makes education a practice, a pedagogical like sense of self, but
Yes.
more importantly, it's medicine. And
I
I
love that.
use
Medicine.
this idea of a speech that I did in 2016 where I said you're teaching, I was telling teachers in this summer fellowship that your teaching isn't teaching, it's medicine.
Yes.
And when you look at today and the world we're in today, you can kind of see that in a bright light of why it's important to have educators like yourself,
Mhm.
educators who try to push the envelope on what learning and living is. And that's who I am. You know, I can go down the laundry list of roles I've had and
Mhm.
experiences, but I think it's really just big on understanding I'm really dedicated to the practice and expanding it, elevating it, but more importantly, question it
Yeah.
because questions are something that we're going to talk about in regards to what young men don't often get a chance to have is the ability to ask more questions and
Mm.
question themselves in the context of how they show up. And that's what I've done with my work. Question how does this work that I'm doing make me show up,
Hmm.
how it changes or enhances my results,
Yeah.
and what are my outcomes that I'm actually measuring. Because success is not really I can't really tell a child or any adult or young adult what success is or their measure for success, but I can help them see success for themselves and build that. So that's what I do. That's my
Gotcha.
work. But to give more expansion, I was a fifth grade science teacher. I was a dean of students.
Wow.
I was a founding world history teacher at a high school where if you've seen Spider-Man Homecoming with Tom Holland, we were on the second floor. I've taught seventh grade history at an all boys school. I've taught sixth grade, seventh grade reading and writing at Kip Ways here in Atlanta.
Mhm.
And had spent time with Usher's New Look, rebuilding his college program, which actually was like a beautiful experience by way of understanding where the end happens when you think about where students think their learning stops or once they graduate or how
Mhm.
do they manage resources and leverage them. So from fifth grade to working with college students, and pretty much at this point, I could say I worked fifth through eighth, ninth through 12th, and then at this point, collegiate on to professional. And
Mhm.
I usually say that gamut of 12 to 26 is my like my measure, my level of who I work with. But that's my experience. And within a 11-year span by this summer, because I count my summer teaching fellowship that I did with Uncommon Schools in New York, because it was so robust, it was
Yeah,
7 weeks. And then it was a measure for me to decide, like for them to decide if they were going to offer me a full-time offer,
got you.
which I did get. That's what led to me going to teach fifth grade science in the first place. That's why I used the term career educator, because I was taught that an educator is a mentor with theoretical and practical solutions. And so that's who I am.
I love it. I didn't look, I'm learning today. I didn't know you had all of that experience. My goodness. So this would
I
be,
try.
be great conversation. I like that you said teaching isn't teaching, it's medicine. So we need to figure out what kind of medicine we need to be using for these stats I'm about to drop. All right.
Hmm.
Black students spend less time in the classroom due to discipline issues, which further hinders their access to quality education. Black students are nearly 2 times as likely to be suspended without educational services than white students. Black students are also 3.8 times as likely to receive one or more out of school suspensions than your white students. This came from the UNCFK through 12 educational fellowships. We've heard these statistics. They get suspended, they get kicked out of school, they don't get offered some of the, and if we start looking at AP classes and IB classes, and Black boys, they're not recommended for these classes at the level of white students. So we know what the challenges are.
Hmm.
What do you see how this is going to go for young Black males in school? What are some other challenges that you see?
I think one key thing is assumption based curriculum development
Mm,
and assuming once you get these statistics or get these numbers or you're utilizing where their socioeconomic background derives from, then you're creating what you consider rigor based off that level. But I feel like the challenge is if you're not exposing someone to what is going to be challenging or what is hard or what do they consider hard about learning, you have to be exposed to it right off the bat, regardless of your background, regardless of where you come from, or even your learning level. I always used to tell myself when I taught fifth grade, and I used to tell the fifth graders, I'm going to teach you to the level of where you're going. And I'm not teaching you to get ready for sixth grade. Because technically, when you think about schools, once you get to May, you're in school, yes, but a few weeks from now, we're conferring you to this designation that you're now in your next grade because summer begins. But if you've been spending that entire year prepping them for that following year, which is sixth grade, I don't think they're ready for the challenges that help them to realize it keeps expanding. Like when we always talk about lifelong learning, but when you think about the classroom system, the rigor expands every year, each year. So I always told myself, you got to teach 2 years ahead of these grade levels. So I taught my fifth graders like seventh graders. I taught my ninth graders like juniors. I taught my college students when I was at Usher's New Look like they were professionals in the workforce. Why? Because it gave them something to imagine. Because that's my point about challenge. One of the challenges that exist right now is that schools lack imagination.
mm,
And they lack imagination in how they develop their curriculum, but the children are missing it within themselves. And what's a major challenge is when you think about a young boy, you're using your hands, you're dancing, you're moving around in elementary school. And then all of a sudden, when you get to middle school and high school, it's this rigid, this is what it means to be a young man. You need to stand up straight. You need to pull up your pants. You need to button up your shirt. You need to tuck your shirt in. It's all this you need to. It's not a lot of exploration around who I am and why I am and why these conventions make me better. Because if you make something like how you dress, the way you look, the way you talk, a reprimand all the time, people are gonna miss the cultural like meaning behind their history. And when
Mhm.
you think about history, everybody has a connective point that connects them to the past, and everybody has a connective point that makes their present meaningful in the now. And everybody connects to the future because it's unknown. But I've seen the challenge with schools is they make it seem like the future is already written,
Mhm.
especially for a young black male. Because the examples we use for young black men are young black men who we really don't know. We don't know their circumstances or the systems that led to why they made the choices they made. But we always highlight the negative aspects of what a young black male is. And
Mhm.
then we quantify and qualify young males through sports, entertainment, and then we're wondering why they don't see academia as a space where they can thrive because we're not acknowledging the socioeconomic background that says, well, the concept of I gotta get it out the mud. But structurally, they understand that getting out the mud visually from their cultural lens at home. Now, getting out the mud means I really do have to make sure my mom is fed because she may be missing a meal. My siblings are fed. I'm fed. Or more importantly, I got to make money so I don't see the moments where my mom or my dad or anybody or my grandmother's crying the way they are about how they're going to make it the next day. The challenge is also it's not acknowledged that they're processing that. They're processing what they're seeing from their people. And they're processing, well, where does this school stuff fit? Because my cousin didn't finish school,
Yeah.
and this is what he doing. My mom finished school, but she feels like she's still struggling. What does all that mean? So
Yeah.
we're making the future this concrete door, and in reality, we don't know.
Yeah.
And the goal is to prepare them preventatively through practices and tactics that make them feel secure in knowing that learning is a luxury that everybody gets and is not based off your socioeconomic status. It's not based
Right.
off the fact that you go to a private school. It's not based off how you dress. It's not based off if your haircut's always cut every day of the week or every Friday. It's not based in any of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's based in the fact that it is a luxury that we all get. It's a diamond made of the pressure of this world that we all supposed to receive based off the fact that the Department of Education was made in 1980. So in 1980, I look at it as everything prior to 1980 was the coal.
Mm-hmm.
Then the pressure that led to the 1980 development of the Department of Education released what could be the diamond, which is the learning system we have, but we know that the gaps still exist by way of the fact that our young males don't feel challenged sometimes and they're already codified into this notion of why they don't respond to the rigor that we claim is rigor or respond to the academia that we claim is academics. When
Mm-hmm.
sometimes learning is simply saying, I want you to breathe for a second. I want you to think to yourself your own thoughts.
Yeah.
And then take that and say, guess what? While you were thinking your own thoughts, your neurons were passing messages. Do we know where neurons are located? Then you can say the neuron is located in the brain. I just turned a moment for them into a lesson plan.
Yeah, you
And I
did.
think you got to have that depth within yourself as an educator. And that's a whole other conversation too.
Yeah.
But the challenge is really not, is manipulating the experience based on what's in front of you.
And I like, and you know what, you said something key. It's also about, it's really about exposure, especially for our young Black male. I watched this documentary. I cannot remember the name of it, but it was of a basketball player, and he went to a barber shop, and he had this, it was this young boy. I think he was maybe 8 years old, and he was asking the boy, what does he want to be when he grows up? And I think the boy was like, I'm gonna be a basketball player because, that's what we do. Everybody in my neighborhood plays basketball. And the actual basketball player, he was like, well, why don't you become the president? And the boy was like, the president? I can become a president? It was just like he had never even imagined or thought of something at that level because no one at his school, no one in his community had ever exposed him to that level of thinking. He had it in his mind he was going to be a basketball player because that is all he knows. And so I feel like schools, because especially if you're in a poor community, if whatever we can do at the school level to expose these kids to all the opportunities, and like you said, it just gives them a better chance to think differently,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know?
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. So, with all of that, how can teachers create a more supportive and culturally responsive learning environment to break some of these barriers?
You know, that it really starts with yourself. It really starts with how you show up. I was just having a conversation recently about how I recognize about myself, how I showed up when I was actually teaching in the classroom.
Yeah.
And when you try to expand beyond that space, you're not really taught that you can navigate both. Like I wasn't really told at first that I can still teach one. If I go to a particular area, I can still teach in that area, but I can impact the neighborhood in which I come from. So let's for a reference, let's say I teach on the east side of Atlanta, but I make impact on the west because I'm born and raised from the west side, right? So you got to have a sense of self or around what you feel like you can offer. And you got to also recognize that what you can offer, if it's not already written in curriculum and if it's not been produced or it's not been used, that means, and for people that are religious and, whatever you believe in, I'm not imposing on you, but I believe in God and I'm a Baptist Christian. So for me, I'm just saying God gives you a moment to say, okay, I can model myself off of somebody, but like someone close to me share with me, I'm not the model in that point. I don't have a model at that point because I'm the blueprint. So when
Mm,
you don't see it for yourself or you see anybody doing it, it's because you're supposed to test it out.
mm,
That's when you actually become a scientist. And we always limit social science to history, but social science is experimentation with social ideals or ways of making information and knowledge applicable.
mm.
So educators really have to see themselves beyond the lesson plan that they were told that they had to be scripted,
Yeah.
beyond the scope and sequence. We got to have some fervor around how we see this role.
Yeah.
Again, an educator is a mentor with theoretical and practical solutions. So
Hmm.
you got as much theory, meaning you're reading, you're learning, John Dewey, Gary Marx, these names, some key concepts from them, but more importantly, you understand how you practice, that your kinesthetic learners in the space, your auditory learners, your visual learners, you know the ones who mutually benefit from all three learning styles together. You also have to have your own personal theory of learning, and understanding what that means and how people should learn. So for me, I believe that the individual should be able to control what they learn, when they learn, how they learn, and they should be able to create their own measure for success. But as an instructor, I guide that. And I guide it through my lesson plan. I guide it through my project-based learning. I guide it through my experiential learning. I guide it through my theory that I present to the students when they read excerpts, and I guide it with their independent practice. But all in all, educators have to realize we control way more of the education experience than we know. And we have to see ourselves as a key stakeholder, and we're second to the number one stakeholder, which is the child.
Mm.
And that's second to the number one stakeholder, which is the child. And you understand that a child would not know how to manage being the number one stakeholder. That's their journey through life to learn. That gives you leverage on in knowing. I call education now future management, especially with times that we're in right now. We're managing how students process information, how students process themselves. So you can still have a history lesson, mathematics lesson, science lesson. It can be based in Georgia standards. It can be the next generation science standards. It can be the big history project. It can be all those things. That's fine. But as an educator, you can't lose sight of the journey towards you're building a person to see themselves as a stakeholder. Because once you get them to see themselves as a stakeholder in the classroom experience, then when we start talking about civil rights, voting rights, civic engagement, they've been taught throughout their existence through you and your practice that they are a stakeholder.
Yeah.
And you saw yourself as a stakeholder. So you understood that I can navigate telling them how to manage their civility because I manage my civility based off how I show up to serve and how I use this information and use this knowledge, use all this big jargon, use this schema, and use all this creative lesson planning. But all that won't matter as we already see in the systems. It won't matter if the sense of self is lost from the educator. And so
Yeah.
we can talk about culturally responsive teaching, but we have to talk about the response that you're giving yourself through turbulent times,
Yeah.
through moments where things are not easy. Because if you shift your being through the hard parts, you don't realize that you're shifting your being in front of those children as well. So it's easier to navigate. Let me just do what the lesson plan says instead of expanding on one of your students who usually gives you, what we call kids we love the most, may give you a little trouble, but
Yeah.
they're asking the most questions today.
Yeah.
Their hand is up, they're actively engaged. And instead of you processing that as they're trying to be funny or they're trying to take away from your learning moment because you've never seen them move like that in your class.
Yeah.
If you're able to pull back and realize, well, you know what, this is a not a new version of this child, this is a version of the child that can exist, and I can help cultivate that. I can help manifest more of that from them, he or she, however you look at it. You just have to realize that you can't be like lost in moments where you don't see it from the child all the time.
Yeah. That's
So culturally responsive is not always just putting, like, we'll talk basketball, we'll talk games, we'll use whatever they Fortnite, we'll talk about TikTok, we'll do all the things that they are interested in and use that and say that's culturally responsive. But culturally responsive is making sure child from the hood, as you want to call it, but low socioeconomic community, whatever you want to call it,
yeah.
their haven, a child coming from their haven should be able to know from their community there are skills and things that they've learned.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are exploratory learners because all you have is outside. They don't have the technology to be inside.
Yeah.
Some of them are technologically advanced and aware because they do know how to use technology in a certain way. They can even teach their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are politically savvy because they see and question how certain people get into office or how certain political structures exist, how power exists. But you have to be able to know that culturally responsive is not just simply changing my lesson plan.
Yeah.
Culturally responsive is acknowledging that my child that I serve comes from a unique culture that's part of their history, and I have to help them manage it with the collective history of the rest of the world on top of the workforce development skills, on top of the SAT prep, on top of the ACT prep, on top of the PSAT prep, on top of the ELCT, all these demands and things that are going to come through the pipeline of what people say schooling should be. We
Mm-hmm.
can't forget that schooling is not always brick and mortar. Schooling is like the Eastern traditions of legalism, Taoism, Confucianism. It's in your heart. It's in your thought patterns. And once you can really see that a child's thought patterns show education, now you can talk about a brick and mortar space that accompanies how they learn. And now your lessons can be culturally responsive in multiple facets. But I believe the culturally responsive has to be acknowledging the child for where they are and picking up the pieces. Stupid build them up with worn out tools, right? That's what I think you have to see when you build them to make a culturally responsive lesson and to be an ally to your children as an educator and teacher.
Yeah, I love it. Well, you know what? This brings us to another part of the conversation where we will talk about kind of like mentorship and other initiatives that you've seen work. So we know that mentorship is important when we're talking about our young Black men, but what are some programs or initiatives or mentoring programs that you've seen that are effective when supporting Black males, and what makes them effective?
So I've seen a few, and I want to reference Big Brothers Big Sisters. Never worked with them before, but I've met people who are big brothers, who are big brothers or big sisters. And what's unique about it is when you apply, they're tailoring the application to the need of like the children that's in their pool, right? And they're
Mhm.
matching you based off these interests. But what I learned is programs like that, who first of all survey the child wholly to give you anecdotes on how you can serve them. Those are the type of initiatives that have to exist. And I'm being cautious in naming too many because I don't really want to name organizations. I want people to just think about what skill sets from these organizations they can pull from, which is
Action.
survey children wholly. And then as you survey children wholly, match them to a person who allows that child to see themselves in
Yeah.
that moment. So
Yeah.
I referenced Dr. Simon Obas. My second year teaching, that he was one of the deans.
Mhm.
And I will never forget during teacher development training, he walked up to me, gave me his book, and was like, learn about your mentor.
Mhm.
I think that right there was, well, one, it was random. I didn't even know who he was for real. He never even told me his name. He
Mhm.
gave me his book and said, learn about your mentor. And I really went home that night and I opened up that book and I was like locked into this ideal that, okay, this is the type of male leader I can be. This is the type of thinker I can be. Oh, wait, I can write a book too. And I already knew he was like working towards his doctorate at the time.
Mhm.
And he doesn't even know for me how much of an image he gave me by way of doing something abstract, is handing me his book and saying, read about your mentor. And I think that's where, when you think initiatives, they should be abstract, but it should be tailored towards the survey of who the child already thinks they are, like think they are, and where those thought patterns derive from. So another reference, I would say, I'm a part of the Emerging 100 of Atlanta, and we support Collegiate 100, and we support, and they're at Oglethorpe, Georgia State, Morehouse, and Spelman, and then we support Best Academy. They're 11th and 12th grade.
Mhm.
And what I like about that initiative is every Friday, once a month, they're brought to the library to engage with the Brothers of the Emergent. The Best Academy Committee creates the presentation. It can be a partnership. So the first time I joined and I went to my first character development session, is what we call them, I saw there was a Regions Bank scenario experience where each one of us were a table that gave each young man a scenario to work through. So some of them had to go to the loan office, some of them had to go to housing. But in that scenario portfolio one sheet, they were given a salary. They were told that they had a family or not. They were told how much money they could make and transition to. And then they had to come pay for subscriptions. They had to buy a house. They had to pay their medical fees. And what I learned with that is strategic partnerships. When you are the initiative that works with young people, bringing in community partners and making sure they activate with what they do, but activate it in a way that allows it to make sense for where we know young people should be going. So it's really, and I can name, we both can name many
Yeah.
programs, but I want to name the features. The features are at the center are moments of learning that help students see the future for themselves and helping them navigate scenarios that could become their reality. Some people will have children. Some people may not have a six-figure job. I will never forget watching the young men's faces who their salary was like 49,000 and 35,000. But what you saw them realize, okay, this is how much I make. And you watch them navigate making strategic decisions. And so when I was working subscription, and if
Mhm.
you had a low salary, I would push you into buying the highest subscription package. And I watched them respond and say, nah, I can't afford that. Nah, I got a family. Nah, like my kids won't be able to eat if I have that subscription package. I need the basic. And what I pulled from that experience, reason why when you ask a question like this and I can reference it,
Yeah.
they were given the potential realities, but they were given control over it. You only gave them a sheet of paper. Their brain and their thoughts had to build around that. So I think with Big Brothers Big Sisters or an Emerging 100 or
Yeah.
the YMCA or the Boys and Girls Club, it's the chance to be experiential. It's the
Mhm.
chance to navigate the adventure and the spontaneity of information, but not making it concrete. I think successful programs don't tell you that this is a concrete destination or a concrete way of learning. They really meet you where you are. And we hear that all the time, but meeting somebody where they are is understanding. Like for me, if you want to work with me, I love Marvel. So if you want to reach me,
Mm-hmm.
you tell me a quote from Marvel, and I'm gonna say, what? Nah. And I'm gonna break that down for you and tell you how I look at that from a different meaning from
Yeah.
just the quote from the movie. One of my favorite lines is from Avengers Endgame when Thor's mother said, everybody fails at who they are instead of being who they're supposed to be.
Mm. Wow.
And
That's
that's and you take that, and now I'm looking at that every time I look at, well, if I'm trying to if I'm trying to be who I am, then I have to recognize that who I thought I was supposed to be can't really exist,
mm.
because being who I am is the greatest learning curve I could possibly have, because I get to grow from my now.
Mm-hmm.
Because I go into the future a lot. I can tell you right now, and I know you are, and many educators and administrators and leaders who are listening to this podcast, some of us are already in 2027, some of us in 2028 already, and we just are now reaching the fourth month of 2025. And it's not a bad thing, but you can get so far in the future that you are creating narratives and creating concrete meanings to say, this is how life is supposed to be, this is how life is going to be. And sometimes we're so far in the future with our kids that we don't replicate these moments, like these programs where they allow them to have the now and navigate the now with the information they have, and then expand their thought around it so they can grow as learners and thinkers.
But when you think about our Black males and just like, kind of just like a briefly thinking of what it is they need. When you think of it from the standpoint of the educator, the parents, or communities, where are we missing the mark with them? And where can we really start to improve their outcome?
And I'll take it back to one of my first points. I think it's reinstilling imagination and
Imagine.
having conversations about imagination, and really in the sense of, what do you imagine for yourself? And
Mm,
even if they're sitting there and they can't give you a response, that right there is data. So
mm,
then you figure out, how do I tailor that conversation, because I know they have a blank response about what they imagine for themselves. And then you give them building blocks. And then from there, you ask that question again. What do you imagine for yourself?
mm,
And then as they're able to answer it, now you start to tell them, well, I want you to imagine this scenario. I want you to imagine this opportunity. I also want you to realize that in your imagination, nothing is concrete. Young Black men need to know that the men that we've seen in our households, the men that we see on TV, the men that people declare and decree we possibly can be, is not concrete. It's not guaranteed.
mm-hmm.
I don't have to be an athlete. I can be athletic,
Yes.
because it's crazy to think that the only time you're really trying to be healthy is when you're an athlete. But we look at the data around health.
Mm-hmm.
Males are the first to go
Yeah.
due to health, like
Yeah.
health issues that relate to moving your body and
Yeah.
continuing that movement into your 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
But if you're only told that, or you're only highlighted when you're running or moving when you're an athlete, then you're going to turn somebody who's a scientist by trade, even at the age of 10, you're going to turn them away from realizing, well, that science that you're learning is the same science that gets you running.
Yeah.
So you're still doing what you love, but you're also healthy at the same time. We
Yeah.
have to start making things concrete for young men. And I even speak from the experience of myself. I wasn't always like this. Like
Mm-hmm.
I thank God every day that I found that in education there was a place for me. But at first I was drifting around trying to wander into, even when I was in the classroom, especially my first 2 years, because I was very ambitious. Because once I started seeing a dynamic of, well, I want to raise like that, and I wasn't exposed like that. My teachers didn't talk to me like that. I'm not going to let my coworker do that. I'm not going to let the principal just bypass creating extensive moments for children in a unique way.
Yeah.
We have to like dive in and start making things concrete. So one, for example, my fifth grade, my first year teacher, I took 23 students with a coworker of mine. Thank God Christina Allison helped me out.
Mhm.
We took those students to the movies. I had got permission slips, got the parents to sign, but I'm in New York. There were no buses, no train. I mean, there was no buses or cars. I took the train. I took 23 fifth graders on the train to the movies. But I wanted them to see that as an educator, I'm willing to go above and beyond when you do what you're supposed to do. And I was telling them on that Monday that as long as you act right this week and you do what you're supposed to do, everybody in this home is going to the movie.
Mm.
And of course, people had their moments. People definitely probably got sent out of class outside of my class. But despite that, I did not make their week concrete. I did not make their trouble or their moment or the thing that went south concrete. I made their opportunity an imaginative one when it came to what's the possibility of when you do right, you find yourself headed to the movies on Friday.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we have to treat young males with a certain um, sense of malleability and allow that formidable spirit, that pride, that toughness that you see that comes up when they are expressing themselves through their own misunderstanding because they're learning themselves. You can't look at a black male and assume that we automatically understand ourselves. Because then, if you assume that, then where's the model for that?
Mm.
Then, when you ask where the model is, then who's the blueprint for that model? And then, when you start diving back in our history as males, then you start to realize, well, every time children learn about Dr. King, they also learn about the trials and tribulations of what he went through, and they learn that he was killed. You hear about the successes of a Malcolm X, you hear that he was killed. You hear about the successes of a Medgar Evers, and you hear that he was killed. You hear about the torment of how when James Baldwin debated people that didn't look like him, how much the condescending tone was given to so when you dive into our history as black males, you dive into a history that always says you can do something, but understand what your fate is when you're finished.
Oh my
And
God.
it's always seeming that our fate is defined.
Yeah.
And that's where every education professional, every leader, every parent, every community member, every thought leader has to let young men know your fate is not defined by me. It's not defined by your circumstance.
Mhm.
It's defined by how much you're willing to imagine.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. That is really, really great. And you know what? I think it's definitely needed. I think people can hear this, and then those tools and resources that teachers use in the classroom would help to expand imagination for our young Black boys. Thank you so much, Michael,
Thank you, Francesca.
for this conversation. Much needed conversation. So tell me a little bit about what's next for you.
So what's next for me is I am really about to start leaning in my power of what I have to offer. I'm about to start focusing in on my developing my school, but right now it's from the sense of a school of thought. So I'm going to be focused on for the next 2 years, let's say, well, 2025 to about 2028. I'm going to be really focusing in on Saturdays and summers, really owning the weekend, sorry, and owning the summers. And when it comes to whatever you're getting from your school, I want to help make it stick. I
Mm,
want to participate in what I'm going to call mental athletics,
mhm.
right? I really want you to be able to own in your mind why you learn what you learn. And I want to help children challenge themselves, especially young men. If I ask you what you learned in school today and you can't tell me anything, I want that to be a building block. And that's what I use on my Saturdays when I help you connect science, reading, writing,
Love it.
um, entrepreneurship, math. But I'm not too. I'm gonna have people help me with the math part. The only thing I can help you with is
Yeah.
I know a dollar and a dollar is $2, and I know if I got $5, I can make $5 compound into 50 if I do what I'm supposed to do. So that's the math I know. But I plan to own the summers. I plan to own the weekends, and then I'm I'm looking to go back into the classroom. I've just received my acceptance to American University's Education Leadership and Policy doctoral program. Received a merit scholarship, so I'm really excited.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much because this is me redeeming myself. I started my doctoral journey in 2018 with Drexel. Had 31 doctoral credits, but I wasn't able to finish. Had a mental breakdown. The
Mhm.
pandemic happened. I was at a transition space in my life, dealing
Yeah.
with the manifestations of what happened after my mom did have breast cancer, and I never really took that well and never really managed it well. And
Yeah.
I'm one to try to keep going. So I'll have a trial or a tribulation, and you'll see me dealing with it. Maybe if you're around me, you'll see me dealing with it that day. And I'll still be dealing with it internally, but I'll be going forward to the next thing. So
Yeah.
right now, I'm also going to give myself grace and I'm going to slow down so I can make these moments. And I'm also going to make sure my digital presence enhances and increases. I realize that I've been doing debate and speaking since about sixth grade. So I
Oh.
got to start realizing that I can't let the voices that society deems a voice,
Mm-hmm.
like a Breakfast Club or a LeBron James, all those individuals who have these platforms, but that's not what their profession is.
Yeah.
But it's my profession to speak
Go
life
profession.
into people, to speak towards what solutions and ideas that we can create. And I can't keep hiding in the shadows and allowing because I'm not an athlete or I don't have six figures or well, I have six figures, so we claim that. But I don't have seven, I don't have seven figures
Yeah. Okay.
or a seven-figure business or
Not
eight-figure
yet.
business. Not yet, anyway. But I can't keep allowing those things to be why I don't step out. And so, really, these next 3 years are just about stepping out, stepping into that power, and owning what I have. And then everything I learned from now, everything I learned from my doctoral program, everything I learned from possibly returning back to the classroom, everything I learned from doing these Saturday programs and this summer program, and building out Prodigious Academy as a school of thought. Like I said, legalism, Taoism, Confucianism, it's something that's on paper, but then it's in your heart. So
Mhm.
I really can't wait to help children do what this conversation was about. And also more children become like you, where they're expanding their palette based off what they started with, and now they're letting it multiply and grow. And I look forward to building more Michael Drivers, more Francescas, and really
Yeah.
just stepping into
Snap
my
to
power
that.
of knowing that we can build people. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build people.
Well, I wish you the best. I know that it's going to happen. Your drive and your passion is there. So I'm definitely going to continue to follow you, Michael. Just thank you so much for doing the show. And for anyone who is trying to get in contact with him, or you like what he said today, or you want him to come into your space and speak to your students or your teachers or your community, okay? His contact information will be in the podcast. Okay. And so just reach out to him. He's open to just, talking to folks and spreading the word. So I really do appreciate that, Michael.
Thank you, Francesca. And I appreciate you for creating this pathway for people like myself and the future
Mhm.
people like us who want to keep continuing this work to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. So, just thank you for a credible conversation. I look forward to your journey. This conversation isn't just about awareness, it's about action, people. So, whether it's fostering meaningful relationships, advocating for equity, or rethinking how we approach discipline and mentorship, we all have a role to play in ensuring our students thrive. And Michael said it best. Get to the business of helping people understand our students, how helping them understand how to use their imagination. If today's episode resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share with a fellow educator, a mentor, a school leader, a community supporter. Let's keep the conversation going. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to Everything But the Lesson Plan so you will never miss an episode. If you loved what you heard, leave us a review. It helps more educators find these important conversations. Everybody out there, please keep on thriving. Thank you.
Thank you.